What a rare find is a valiant woman. Her worth surpasses by far what can be measured in material things. With her husband, she holds a union of trust. They are everything to each other. All the days of their life together, they evoke the best in each other. In all her endeavors, she is like a lighthouse, bringing light and guidance to all who pass by. From first light of day to darkest night, she seeks to supply the needs of her family and community. She conceives an idea and nurtures it, bringing to fruition her dreams. She strengthens herself with joy and vitality. She attacks her task with enthusiasm. Her enthusiasm never ceases. Her force cannot be diminished. Her happiness shines for her children and her friends. Her husband praises her. Many women have done well, but she surpasses them all. Beauty may be deceptive, and words the weapon of stealth, but a life of action bears its own witness to the glory of the eternal. Praise her for her deeds, her life of valor. Praise her to the heavens. Praise her to all. A teaching from Albert Einstein. Strange is our situation here upon earth. Each of us comes for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to divine a purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know, that we are here for the sake of each other, above all for those upon whose smile and well-being our own happiness depends. Many times a day I realize how much my own outer and inner life is built upon the labors of others, and how earnestly I must exert myself in order to give in return as much as I have received and am still receiving. We have come together this morning to honor the life and to mourn the loss of Ellen Teitelbaum. May her memory be for each of us a blessing. We are thankful for all that was good and true in the way that she lived, for the gift of her presence in our lives, and for the ongoing sense of her presence in our hearts, which will endure among all those who knew and loved her. It is a daunting and ultimately impossible task to attempt to capture the depth and complexity of a human soul using the tools of the written or spoken word. And yet, we are driven by our human need for meaning and continuity to make the attempt nonetheless. So let us acknowledge that today is the merest beginning of the process of discerning the impact that Ellen has had and will continue to have on our lives, a process that will continue over the coming weeks and months, and for many of us last far into the future. Reflections on Ellen's life will be offered from several different perspectives this morning. I will begin with a general overview, and then we'll hear from several of her family members who will add some detail from their own unique vantage points. Ellen Teitelbaum entered the world on May 8, 1943, in a Cleveland hospital, the second of 3 daughters born to her parents. She grew up in Shaker Heights, near what was then the intersection of Kinsman and Lee Roads, although she ended up raising her family in the rival city of Cleveland Heights. Upon graduation from Shaker Heights High School, she found work immediately in University Circle, and it wasn't too much later that she met the man to whom she would be married for 53 years. The story of how David and Ellen came into each other's lives reads a bit like a modern fairy tale. It seems that David and his good friend Marty were grabbing a bite to eat one summer day at the Tasty Shop at Cedar Center when a couple of girls walked in. Both boys knew one of the girls, but neither of them had ever met the second, who of course was Ellen. David and Marty struck up a conversation with them, and the talk turned eventually to a local tourist attraction called the Geodesic Dome, which none of them besides Marty had ever seen. Marty suggested that they all hop into his convertible and head out to Novelty to take a look, an idea to which all were agreeable. As the two boys headed out to the car, Marty pulled David aside and whispered something in his ear, the specifics of which David could not quite make out. As it turned out, Ellen and David ended up riding in the back seat of the convertible together, an experience which set off a romantic chain reaction that led to their engagement just a few months later. It was ironic and poignant when David discovered a short time later that the words his friend had whispered to him had expressed a request to let the new girl, Ellen, sit up front with Marty, rather than in the back seat with David. So many things would not have happened, and we would not be here today if David had heard and heeded those words. But fortunately, he did not. And the result of that momentary miscommunication was an extremely happy and successful 53-year-long marriage for David and Ellen. As David reflected on their marriage, he shared that Ellen was the strongest woman he ever knew, that she was more than his wife, but also his partner and co-pilot through life, collaborating with him on every important decision. That she always saw the glass half full rather than half empty, and that she did not spend her energy on complaining, but rather on the ongoing cultivation of the many relationships that meant so much to her. Ellen was first and foremost a people person. With her infectious sense of humor, her tremendous inner strength, and her ability to be present for others, it's no wonder that she was so deeply loved, or that so many people referred to her as their best friend. However, within her broad social network, it was her family that occupied the most important place in her life. She was devoted to her husband David, her 3 children, James, Debbie, and Amy, her sisters Gail and Connie, and her brother-in-law Mark. She was also deeply connected to her nieces and nephews and to their children in turn as well. As her own children grew up and had families of their own, she welcomed her sons-in-law, Carmen and Eric, into her life, and they, like her brother-in-law, were embraced as full family members. Still, perhaps the most elevated relationship status in her life was reserved for her 2 grandchildren, Olivia and Jay. Ellen was passionately committed to being part of their lives in a meaningful way. That meant that anything they were interested in, she made it her business to be familiar with and to understand. This led Ellen, among other things, to become an expert in the Harry Potter narratives and to develop skills for the internet game of Animal Jam. Olivia and Jay felt keenly their grandmother's commitment to them, and it inspired a sustained desire to be in her presence as often as possible. The cry of, "When is Grandma coming?" was one heard often in their homes, and at certain times, it was clear that the best way to address a question or challenge in their lives was to pick up the phone or log on to Skype and give Grandma a call. They knew that with her, they could be fully themselves, and she would respond with both acceptance and love. Of course, anyone who knew Ellen realized that her appreciation and love for her family members easily spilled over onto those who were socially connected to them. In fact, many of her children's friends growing up related to her as a surrogate parent, affectionately calling her Mom or Mama T. And Ellen was always happy to spend time with them at the ice cream parlor or the mall, even if her own children didn't happen to be up for those activities at the time. Ellen's life, and with it her family's, went through a significant and challenging change about 13 years ago when she and David were out in Lake Tahoe celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. It was at the outset of their trip, and they had planned to spend the day outdoors in the beautiful surroundings. But Ellen was experiencing a terrible headache, and she was having trouble breathing. Initially, both she and David thought it might be due to altitude sickness, but when they took her to see a physician, they discovered that her oxygen level was dangerously low. So low that the doctor couldn't believe she was still conscious. She was immediately admitted into the hospital, where she stayed for several days before they returned to Cleveland and sought out help at the Cleveland Clinic. Both the doctors locally and in Tahoe had misdiagnosed Ellen's condition as a form of farmer's disease, which had deepened everyone's concern since the prognosis for that disease would have given her less than a year to live. But instead of her condition steadily deteriorating as the doctors had predicted, Ellen was able to find stable medical footing once she incorporated an oxygen supplement into her life on a regular basis. And Ellen, who was never one to give up or give in, was determined to live her life on terms that were meaningful and fulfilling to her, and not be defined by her medical status. Ellen's condition remained stable for more than a decade, until relatively recently, when it became clear that her lung function was weakening, and that the one hope she had of not succumbing to the disease was to make application to be put on the list for a lung transplant. This was a long shot given her age, and she was frustrated by the fact that she had to limit her travel to see beloved family members because she had to remain within 4 hours of Cleveland in case an organ donation situation were to come about. And then just over a month ago, against all odds, she and David received a phone call one day with the incredibly hopeful message that a match for Ellen's lungs had been found and that she should plan on coming in early the next morning for the transplant surgery. While the prospect of such serious surgery was frightening, Ellen and David and the rest of the family understood that this was her one best chance of being able to overcome her lung condition and gain some additional and precious time with her family. Both of her grandchildren took in this information with tremendous hopefulness. Jay expressed delight that after the transplant, they would all be able to play a real game of hide and seek without the oxygen tube giving away their grandmother's chosen hiding place. And Olivia promptly dubbed Ellen with a new set of lungs as Grandma 2.0, hoping that Ellen would again be able to travel to Memphis for Olivia's birthday celebration. And Ellen also allowed herself a bit of hope as she told her sister Connie the night before her surgery, in what was to be their last conversation, "I'm going to get my new lungs and breathe on my own for the first time in 14 years. And yet, Connie sensed in a way that only a sibling can that the reality of Ellen's feelings that night was more complicated and laced with uncertainty than she was letting on in her words. The surgery was technically successful, as Ellen's new lungs were accepted by her body. But tragically, the complication of an infection soon set in, and Ellen would not again regain consciousness. The family was on a roller coaster for several weeks as they were given alternately more and less hopeful predictions from the medical staff about Ellen's chances for recovery. Until just a few days ago, after receiving permission from her loved ones to take her leave of this world, her heart finally stopped beating, and her inspiring journey through this life came to a conclusion. Even in the absence of her physical presence, the example that she set of how to live a full, meaningful life will continue to be a shining beacon and inspiration to all those who knew and loved her. For many, such as her sister Gail, it will be Ellen's heroic determination to fight for the life she wanted, even under the most challenging circumstances. For others, it will be Ellen's amazing ability to see the good, even when the glass was less than half full. And for still others, it will be Ellen's profound capacity and commitment to connect with other people, especially her own family members, through love and humor and acceptance. May all of these aspects of her life continue to find expression in the hearts and actions of all those touched by her spirit, and in this way will her memory certainly continue to be for a blessing. Zichrona livracha. At this time, I'd like to invite her daughter Debbie to come forward and share some reflections on her life.
Mom was resilience. She was dealt an unfair hand with respect to her health, yet as a child, even as a young adult, I was never aware of how much pain she was in or how challenging things could be for her. I didn't understand that part of her experience until I got older and became a mom and an aging adult myself. She persevered through her pain and her physical limitations. She stared down pain straight in the eye, quitting smoking later in life. I remember her carrying around an unlit cigarette during Parents' Weekend at my college senior year at the College of Worcester. And I'm not sure what attempt it was at quitting, but she did it. She began doing aerobics with videos, I think by Denise Austin in our basement when she was in her 40s. She joined a gym in the 90s. She worked out with a trainer. She was courage. Mom was selfless, never lamenting about her pain or how difficult something could be. She showed up whenever needed. She put her needs aside always for the greater good of her children, her grandchildren, family, friends, and coworkers. Mom was intelligence, helping me solve problems with life, work, academics. She was my go-to proofreader for papers, starting back in high school all the way through the letters and emails I sent later in life. She solved complex puzzles, accepting impossible challenges, especially when it came to untangling things. She went back to college later in life because society said she needed to in order to get promoted to a position she'd already been doing for years. Mom was unconditional love and support. Never could anyone feel more unwavering support, pride, and love from a person than I have the past 48 years. I'm so grateful to have had her as my mom.
Thank you so much, Debbie. This time I'd like to invite Amy, Helen's other daughter, to come forward and share her reflections.
My mother always said that I had a talent for writing in words, but my own words are failing me today. So I'm going to share something that is from a book that I used to read to my daughter when she was little. And every time I read it, it reminded me of my own mother and her heart that was so full of love and light and passion for the world. It's by Liva Moore Gray. My mama had a dancing heart, and she shared that heart with me. With a grin and a giggle, a hug and a whistle, we'd slap our knees, and Mama would say, "Bless the world, it feels like a tip-tapping, song-singing, finger-snapping kind of day. Let's celebrate." And so we did. When a warm spring rain would come pinging on the window pane, we'd kick off our shoes and out into the rain we'd go. We'd dance a frog-hopping, leap-growing flower opening Hello Spring Ballet. High-stepping and splashing, the rain running down our faces. I'd slip swish behind Mama through the newly green grass, and afterward we'd read rain poems and drink sassafras tea with lemon curls floating. And in the summer, when the waves would come splashing on the shore, out we'd go into the red-orange morning with kites and balloons tied to our wrists. We'd do a seabird flapping, dolphin arching, Hello Summer Ballet, with me following Mama, the sand stuck between the toes of our up-and-down, squish-squashing feet. And afterward, we'd seashell pile the windowsill and drink lemonade cold. And when the cool autumn winds would come puffing through the clouds and the hold-on-tight leaves would finally let go and flutter to the ground, out we'd go into the eye-blinking blue air, with Mama leading into a leaf-kicking, leg-lifting, hand-clapping, Hello Autumn Ballet. And afterward, we'd wax paper, press leaves, red and gold, and drink hot tea spiced. And when the winter snows came softly down, shawling the earth, out we'd go and do a body-flat, arms moving up and down, snow angel, Hello Winter Ballet. And then we'd stand up, Mama first, and dance in slow motion like hand-mitten, galoshes galumphing, funny old snowmen. And afterward, we'd cut snowflake paper white delicate and sip cocoa with marshmallows floating. And now, after satin ribboning my feet and listening to the violin sing swelling behind me, onto the stage I go, air daring, leap flying, wind soaring, letting the spring rain, summer waves, autumn leaves, winter snow carry me along until the music slows and I feather float down to the ground. And afterwards, I imagine that I hear my mama saying, "Bless the world, it feels like a tip-tapping, song-singing, finger-snapping kind of day. Let's celebrate." Because my mama had a dancing heart, and she shared that heart with me.
Thank you so much, Amy. Our final reflection this morning will be offered from one of Ellen's grandchildren, Jay.
Ellen Teitelbaum was my grandmother. To a lot of people, she may have seemed on the outside to be just that. My grandmother. My mother's mother. But to me, she was so much more. She was my playmate, my confidant, and most of all, she was my friend. She would have done anything for me and my cousin, her two granddaughters. She would have done anything for anyone she knew who was in need of assistance. She was so accepting. Whatever I talked to her about, she was accepting for who I was, no questions asked. I have an acute memory from just before she went into the hospital. We were talking about the holidays, and she asked what I wanted. I recently got into photography, and I sent her the link to a camera I wanted. She disappeared from Hangouts for a moment after I sent that link, and when she came back, she told me she had ordered it. It just arrived. She was overall an amazing, strong person. She got through so much and never asked questions. She always held her head high and accepted life as it was. I will never, ever forget her or stop remembering any of this, no matter what.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you very much, Jay. And thanks to all three of you for those beautiful and courageous tributes to your mother and grandmother. Who is worthy to be counted among the extraordinary? One who lives with integrity and does what is right and recognizes the truth, whose tongue utters no slander, who does others no evil, who cherishes others who behave honorably. Unwavering, this person will keep a promise even at personal expense and will never lend money with ruthless intent or take a bribe to harm the innocent. Whoever lives this way will be remembered always. Please rise for the chanting of the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malot Kedoshim, Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Chava Fredo בת מורס ומומנת שלחה לעולמה. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah, your divine presence, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the soul of Ellen Teitelbaum, who has gone to her eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter her beneath your wings eternally, and bind her soul among the living, that she may rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Burial will take place today, immediately following the funeral at the Acacia Cemetery on Psalm Center Road. And the family will receive friends at the Teitelbaum home today, following burial until 8 p.m., and tomorrow from noon until 8 p.m. at the Teitelbaum residence, 5049 Bristol Court in Lyndhurst. In lieu of flowers, donations are suggested to the American Lung Association.